"You sure you're allowed to be here, Grandpa?" The voice was young, sharp-edged, laced with that easy arrogance of someone who had never felt the weight of war. It cut clean through the low hum of an idle compressor echoing across the cavernous hangar. The old man didn't answer. He was kneeling beside the open nacelle of a weathered B-17 flying fortress, his rag moving in slow, careful circles over the dull aluminum. The smell of oil and time mingled in the air. Each pass of his hand seemed to polish not just metal but memory itself. "Hey!" another voice called. This one louder, cockier, carrying the swagger of youth in uniform. "This section's restricted to restoration personnel. You lose your tour group or something?" The old man paused, then wiped his hands on a faded red cloth. He didn't look up right away. The light caught his white hair, his worn flight jacket, and the small embroidered patch, a faded emblem of the 8th Air Force. When he finally turned toward them, his face was calm. "Weathered but calm. Just keeping her company," he said softly. His tone wasn't defensive, and it was steady, almost reverent. The three airmen exchanged amused looks. They were maintenance techs from the flight line, used to the cold perfection of F-35s and sleek drones, not these ancient beasts of rivets and propellers. To them, the B-17 was a relic, and the man tending it, a ghost of another world. "Man," one of them muttered, "they'll let anyone in here?" The old man turned back to the aircraft. His hand brushed the edge of the nose art beneath the dust, faint letters barely visible through the faded paint. "Heaven can wait." He smiled, a private, knowing smile. Footsteps echoed from behind. A different gait this time, measured, commanding. A colonel entered the hangar, scanning a clipboard as he walked. When he saw the old man, he stopped mid-stride. The air changed, subtle but felt. "Airmen," the colonel said quietly. His voice carried authority, but not anger. The younger men straightened instinctively. Then the colonel's eyes caught the glint on the old man's jacket, the tarnished silver wings. "B-17 issue. Pilot's wings." The colonel's tone shifted, softening with recognition. "Sir, were you with the 8th? The old man nodded once. "Thurley, 35th Bomb Group." Silence. Even the hum of the hangar seemed to pause. The young men's faces changed, arrogance dissolving into the awkward realization that history had just looked them in the eye. The old man gave a small nod toward the bomber. "She's the last one I flew home," he said quietly. "Figured I owed her a bit of care before I go." The colonel stayed a moment longer than he meant to. There was something about the old man's composure, the stillness that comes only from having seen too much and spoken too little. He gave a slow nod, almost a salute, before turning to the younger airmen. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "carry on." And then he left, leaving behind a silence that pressed heavier than any reprimand. The young techs shifted uneasily. One of them muttered something about getting back to the jet line, but none moved. Their eyes lingered on the silver wings, on the bomber's weathered frame, on the man who had just returned to his work as though nothing had happened. He didn't seem offended. Didn't seem proud either. Just steady. His hands traced the curve of the old propeller hub, fingertips finding dents and scratches like reading Braille. Each mark told a story, some of metal, some of men. He spoke softly, almost to himself. You keep a thing alive long enough, it starts talking back. The youngest of the three, a lean airman named Riley, frowned. "Sir," he said tentatively, You actually flew one of these?" The old man looked up, eyes catching the reflection of the plane's worn surface. "Flew her, fought in her, prayed in her." He smiled faintly. "Then watched most of her sisters never make it home." That landed like a quiet thunderclap. The airmen exchanged glances but said nothing. The hangar door creaked as a breeze drifted in from the field. Outside, the distant rumble of jets echoed across the base. Clean, cold, mechanical. But here, inside, everything was softer. Dust hung in beams of light, dancing like memories. The old man reached into a small wooden toolbox beside him and pulled out a photograph, edges curled, colors long faded. 4 young faces stood proudly in front of a B-17, arms over shoulders, grinning with that unshakable invincibility only youth can carry. He brushed a thumb across the photo. 2 of them made it past 20, he murmured. Then he slipped the picture back into his pocket, as if tucking away a heartbeat. Riley cleared his throat. "Sir, why keep fixing her? I mean, she's not gonna fly again." The old man chuckled quietly, the sound dry and gentle. "No, son. She's done flying. But she's not done teaching." He turned back to the gleaming metal, his voice fading into the hum of distant turbines. "She reminds people what it costs to build the sky you take for granted." For a moment, the young airman didn't move. Something had shifted, barely perceptible but real. Respect had crept in where arrogance once stood. As they left the hangar, Riley glanced back one last time. The old man was still there, head bowed slightly under the wing, hands moving with reverence. Beside him, the ghost of a bomber seemed almost alive again. That night, long after the base lights dimmed and the hangar fell silent, the old man stayed. A single work lamp cast a cone of yellow over the open fuselage, painting the bomber's skin in gold and shadow. He rested his hands on the cold metal and closed his eyes. And just like that, the years began to fall away. The still air of the hangar turned into the frozen wind of 1944. Engines thundered 4 at a time, the deep, trembling growl of a fortress waking to life. He could smell the burnt oil and hear the clipped British ground crew calling out through the haze. "Chocks away!" He was 23 again, Lieutenant Randall Hughes of the 35th Bomb Group, sitting in the left seat of Heaven Can Wait. The headset pressed against his temple. The oxygen mask itched, and below, the English countryside rolled by in fog and fear. "Formation check, 2 o'clock high," came the co-pilot's voice. 12 bombers formed up in perfect lines, silver wings catching the dawn. They were headed east, deep into enemy country. Berlin, mission number 48, the last one before rotation home. He remembered the first burst of flak, black flowers blooming in the sky. He remembered the sudden jolt as shrapnel tore through the starboard wing, and the cry from the waist gunner, "Max hit!" The old man's fingers twitched against the cold metal of the present-day aircraft. Even after 80 years, he could still feel the vibration of those engines through his bones. Back in the memory, smoke filled the cockpit, fuel pressure dropping. The co-pilot shouted something about feathering the number 3 prop. Randall kept the yoke steady, jaw tight, voice calm. "Hold her level. We're not going down here." They limped out of formation, losing altitude fast. 2 of the crew bailed out over the channel. The rest stayed because he stayed. "Come on, old girl," he'd whispered through gritted teeth. "Just a little further," and somehow impossibly she made it. 3 engines coughing, hydraulics shot, the B-17 skidded into the grass at Thurley at sunset. Wheels collapsed, wings groaning, the fuselage grinding to a stop. When the crew climbed out, Randall sat for a long moment, staring through the cracked windscreen at the dying light. He reached over and tapped the dash, a quiet thank you between man and machine. Then the world faded. The roar of engines dimmed, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the creak of an old hangar. He opened his eyes again, back in the present. His hand was still resting on the same metal. The same rivets, the same ghost, he whispered almost to the plane itself. "You got us home, old girl. Every one of us that mattered." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark, a flag rope clicked against its pole, steady, like a heartbeat still refusing to quit. Morning came soft and silver over the airfield. The hangar doors were still half open, letting in the first cool breath of dawn. Randall Hughes was already there. Same stool, same rag, same gentle rhythm. He worked in silence, polishing the name beneath the nose art until the faded letters caught the light. Footsteps echoed behind him. Boots, several pairs. He didn't turn. "Morning, sir," came a voice, younger, hesitant. It was Riley. He and the other 2 airmen stood awkwardly at the edge of the hangar, hands clasped behind their backs. They were out of uniform protocol, but somehow it still felt like inspection. Randall looked up and smiled faintly. "You boys get lost again?" Riley shook his head. No, sir, we looked you up. 35th Bomb Group, Thurley. He swallowed hard. You flew 27 missions. The old man said nothing, just nodded once. He'd never been one for counting. One of the others stepped forward, holding something, a photograph printed from the museum archives. It showed the crew of Heaven Can Wait, lined up proudly on a tarmac in England. The young pilot in the middle was unmistakable. Randall Hughes, 23, smile sharp as sunlight. Riley's voice was quiet. Sir, the base historian said your plane was written off after Berlin. They said the pilot saved 5 lives that day. Randall's eyes lowered. 6, he corrected softly. Mac didn't make it. The hangar fell silent again. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy with the weight of names unspoken, men carried in memory alone. Then came the sound of another pair of boots. Crisp, deliberate. The colonel entered, cap in hand. He walked straight to the bomber's nose, tracing the metal with reverent fingers. Mr. Hughes, he said quietly, I checked the archives myself last night. You were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Twice. Randall shrugged, a half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Paperweight, sir. The boys who didn't come home deserved it more. The colonel stood straighter. Permission to speak freely? Always. You're wrong, the colonel said. You all did what none of us had to. You built the sky we serve under. We just maintain it. For a long moment, the two men faced each other, one standing tall in crisp blues, the other hunched and oil-stained, yet somehow greater in presence. The colonel turned to the younger airman. Gentlemen, he said, voice firm, if you're wondering what honor looks like, take a good look. Randall chuckled softly, embarrassed by the attention. Colonel, I'm just an old man keeping busy. But the colonel shook his head. No, sir. You're keeping history alive. He stepped back and saluted. Not a casual gesture, a full, formal salute. The airmen followed suit one by one until all 3 stood rigid before the old pilot. Randall hesitated, then returned it slowly, his hand trembling just slightly. For the first time in decades, it wasn't just muscle memory. It was meaning. For a long time after the salute, no one spoke. The hangar seemed to hold its breath. Dust motes drifted through beams of light, glowing like fragments of memory. Randall finally broke the silence with a low chuckle. Well, he said, that's the first time I've been saluted since Truman was president. The airmen laughed quietly, not at him this time, but with him. The kind of laughter that releases something unspoken, something healed. The colonel gestured toward the bomber's open fuselage. You still planning to finish her? Randall wiped his hands on his rag and nodded. If I can. These old birds. They've got a way of waiting for you to come back. Riley stepped forward. Sir, we'd like to help. If that's all right. Randall blinked, surprised. You boys have jets to tend. We'll manage, Riley said. She deserves more than one set of hands. The old man studied them a moment, saw the sincerity in their eyes, and finally gave a small nod. All right, then, he said softly. Let's get to work. The rest of the morning passed without much talk. Metal rang, wrenches turned, the rhythm of labor filling the space where misunderstanding used to be. Now and then, Randall would pause to explain some detail, how to seat a rivet by feel, how to listen for hollow tone in old alloy. The young men listened like apprentices before a master craftsman. At noon, they stepped back, wiping their hands, staring at the aircraft they'd once mocked. Under the bright hangar light, Heaven Can Wait didn't look so broken anymore. The dull silver gleamed softly, like it was remembering what it used to be. The colonel approached Randall again, voice quiet. You know, the museum board's been trying to restore this bird for years. They gave up when they couldn't find anyone who'd flown her. Randall's gaze stayed on the bomber. Some things can't be restored with money, Colonel. You need memory. You need patience. He smiled faintly. And a little forgiveness. The colonel frowned slightly. Forgiveness? Forgetting what the world made of you after the war, Randall said. You spend long enough surviving. You forget how to live. The younger airmen looked down, humbled by the weight of those words. They didn't fully understand, not yet, but they would. Time would teach them, the way it had taught him. The colonel reached out and placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Then let's make sure she flies again, even if only in people's hearts." Randall's eyes glistened. He gave a single nod. "Then let's do her justice." Outside, the wind stirred across the runway, carrying with it the faint, imagined echo of engines that hadn't flown in 80 years. 4 deep notes rolling through the silence, like ghosts remembering the way home. Weeks passed. The hangar became a second home, a place where time didn't move quite the same. Every day, Randall worked beside the 3 young airmen. They sanded, polished, riveted. They learned. And they listened. He told them stories sparingly, never for attention, always for truth. How cold the English skies were at 20,000 feet. How every mission felt like a coin toss with fate. How courage wasn't loud and it was quiet, disciplined, patient. Just like the old bomber they were bringing back to life. Sometimes when the day ended and the sun slipped behind the runway, they'd sit on toolboxes, drinking coffee from paper cups. The hangar would glow orange in the light, and the B-17's wings would shimmer like they were still waiting for orders. Riley once asked him, "Sir, when you flew her last, were you scared?" Randall smiled faintly. "Every time." The trick wasn't not feeling fear. It was flying anyway. He said it so simply that it felt carved in stone, the kind of line that would stay with them long after he was gone. Then, one morning, the stool was empty. No rag, no toolbox, just a folded note left on the workbench. "Boys, you did her proud. She's where she belongs now, in good hands. Keep her clean. Keep her remembered." RH they asked around, but no one had seen him leave. The colonel later said quietly, "He probably went home. The kind of home you can't find on a map." A month later, the museum held a small ceremony. The Heaven Can Wait stood finished, polished, complete, her wings gleaming under the lights. A small plaque rested beside her nose. Captain Randall Hughes, 35th Bomb Group. 8th Air Force flew 27 missions. 1944 to 45 brought them home. The colonel gave the closing words. "He once told me this plane wasn't done teaching." I think he was right. Every man and woman who walks through this hangar will learn something about duty, about gratitude, and about what kind of courage keeps a world standing. When the ceremony ended, the young airman lingered. Riley ran his hand along the wing, cool metal beneath warm light. Somewhere deep in the silence, he thought he heard engines starting. 4 of them, steady, proud, eternal. He looked up at the ceiling rafters, smiling through the ache in his throat. "Clear skies, sir," he whispered. Outside, the evening wind moved across the field, carrying a faint echo, the sound of a fortress rising one last time. Some heroes don't leave monuments behind, only memories polished by time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still remembers what honor truly means.